Welcome to today's masterclass. My name is Sandra Ellery, and I will be your host today. For those of you who are unfamiliar with CSIA, we are a global nonprofit trade association with over 500 member companies in 35 countries. To highlight just a few of CSIA many member benefits, the CSIA Best Practices Manual guides control system integrator companies in the setup of running a solid company. These best practices reflect the knowledge gained by system integrators over the years and shared freely. Any system integrator company will benefit from deploying the best practices, but gaining the CSI certification is a confirmation by a third party that you have deployed them correctly. Maintaining a valid certification ensures your company stays on the path to continuous improvement. For partner members, CSIA offers an ecosystem to grow their system integrator program, understand their customer pain points, monitor industry trends, and share their thought leadership. A trusted resource of qualified integrator and suppliers, the CSIA Industrial Automation Exchange helps system integrators, industry supplier, and manufacturers process companies, connect, and do business. That makes the exchange a first-stop shop where end users can compare integrators, determine which products to use, and have the questions answered by specialists in the field. For system integrators, the partners, it provides a platform to increase your digital presence, support content and SEO marketing efforts, positions your company and C-suite as thought leaders, showcase your expertise, and nurture prospects by providing a trusted, credible source for information about your company and its products. Finally, a reminder that in 2021, we will have increased access to knowledge sharing, community building, and networking throughout the year when you join or renew your CSIA membership. CSIA is committed to delivering extreme relevant content to system integrators while providing partner members access to a highly engaged audience. To that end, the CSIA will deliver weekly virtual events on a broad range of topics and experiences, all of which are open to sponsorship. For more information about CSIA membership, virtual events, and sponsorship and advertising opportunities, contact us at info@staff.controlsys.org. At this time, I would like to introduce to you Jack Barber and Don Roberts, who are no strangers to CSIA. You guys are muted.
You're on mute, Jack.
Jack, in your nav bar, you'll see a little microphone. It's got a little red X across it. Just click the red X or the red slash.
Or Alt-A.
All right, sorry about that, everybody. My screen disappeared when I tried to share my slides, so I couldn't even get back to the controls to unmute myself, so I apologize for that. Anyways, good morning, everyone, or afternoon or evening, depending on where you're located. Quick introduction to Exotek. If you're not familiar with us, we're a management consulting firm that focuses exclusively on system integration, I'll say in our industry, test, measurement, control, system integrators. So we appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. I guess I'll ask, can you guys see my slides at this point? All right, awesome. Anyways, I'll just start as an introduction to these webinars that we have planned. I'll call them webinars or virtual events. You know, at the start of this year, Exotek approached CSIA about how we could kind of further assist the CSIA community with implementing best practices, given this kind of COVID environment that we're living in, and less opportunities actually to be together at conferences and whatnot. We have a majority of members of CSI joined with the intent of kind of getting your company to the next level. So we wanted to kind of come up with ways to help you either start deploying your best practices, or for those of you that have been around for a while, maybe implemented some best practices, but looking to go further, you know, how can we be there to better support you? So that's what these sessions are intended to do. Our first session here, our intent is really just to kind of provide a general orientation to your best practices efforts. And then in future sessions, we'll dive into specific areas like project management, financial management, and just general management of your company from a strategic planning and operational perspective. So to help us kind of get started with this, it would be useful to know kind of the sizes of companies represented in the audience. So Sandra, can you run that first poll to kind of get at that information? So yeah, if you don't mind, just let us know kind of the size of organization you have. See some responses already coming in here. It's anonymous, so feel free to respond. All right, looks like things have settled out there. So actually a pretty good diversity, Don, in representation here. We have some companies that I suppose everybody can see the results as well. But yeah, so it looks like most organizations are kind of in the 11 to 25 people range. That's where we do see a lot of companies really recognizing that they need to implement best practices. But also it's encouraging to see some larger companies from 50 to 100 also recognizing that they need to continue to focus efforts in this area. Don, any thoughts from seeing the results of this?
Well, I think it's great. It certainly helps us tailor a little bit the messaging that we provide based on a number of people and the size of the companies. And I think we're going to hit on a few things that are going to be beneficial for that whole spectrum. So yeah, thanks, Jack. I appreciate that.
Yeah. All right. So we wanted to start with setting some expectations. We wanted to, you know, first of all, you know, what is kind of the intent of this session? What we're trying to get out of it is to provide you kind of the general orientation. We often get comments of kind of the deer in the headlights when people approach best practices. So our goal is not to, in these sessions, to go through every single best practice, but rather kind of get you on the right path and get you kind of going, as well as if you feel like you're stuck, you know, Exotek's here to kind of help you overcome whatever, you know, hurdle that is to get you on your way. So this isn't intended to be a webinar, you know, yes, we have some slides, but it's not a canned presentation crammed with a bunch of slides. Our hope is really that this will be a discussion, you know, open for topics as you want to present them to us. So we invite questions and comments throughout the presentation. In your mind, be thinking about kind of those I wish I knew sort of things. You know, what's bothering you with respect to implementing best practices? You know, what's kind of keeping you up at night, whether you're worried about with respect to your businesses, and we'll pivot to you know, whatever it is that the audience wants to talk about. So in that spirit, I'll ask, are there any questions at this time?
Jack, should we ask questions as we go, or should we save them until the end?
Yeah, thanks, Sandra, for that. So yes, our intent with this virtual event is it to be interactive and answer questions as they come up. I know a lot of webinars, you know, they kind of ask you to hold questions to the end because they're trying to get through content. But in this case, as we're kind of bringing up subject matters. Our intent is to have that provoke questions and thoughts, and we'll spend as much time on particular topics as people have questions or interest in.
Sandra, do you want them to put that in the Q&A box or the chat box, or where do you think is best?
I would like for the attendees to use the Q&A box to ask their questions.
All right, and Don, keep me honest. If you'll monitor those, then feel free to interrupt me, and we'll answer them as they come up.
Jack, I'm not that kind of guy that's going to interrupt you. You know that.
All right, so let's start with the kind of why of it. Why should we pursue best practices for our organizations? We certainly hear from our clients sometimes that this can seem like a lot of red tape. Can we just focus on the engineering and working on the technical solutions for our clients rather than this? So, our response to that is you can pick up almost any book about building your business. It will inevitably have at least a section on honing your honing your practices. For instance, in Scaling Up by Vern Harnish, we pulled this quote out of it. I think it's useful is goals without routines are wishes. Routines without goals are aimless. The most successful business leaders have a clear vision and the discipline, meaning routines, to make it a reality. Certainly that's echoed in books like Traction and E-Myth. There's the common theme that we have to focus on how we run our business, not just simply bury our heads into doing our businesses. I think of the old adage, it's kind of like those who forget the past are doomed to repeat it. And certainly as you grow your system integration business, if you want to not get stymied by that growth and ultimately not be able to grow, then you need to be able to pick your head up above everything that's going on in your business, and kind of, we often say, focus on working on your business, not just in your business. Don, thoughts there?
Yeah, it's not it's not surprising, I guess, that when you look at these books and methodologies for strategic planning and how to build a generic business, that processes and the definition of the processes is key in every one of them. Like you said, Jack, I mean, you look at the balanced scorecard, out of the 4 perspectives, one of them is processes, right? With the strategy map the same. You look at Traction, and one of the 6 components of Traction is the processes are scaling up. One of the 4 fundamentals is how do I do what I'm supposed to be doing? So I think it certainly speaks well to the importance of being able to define what your processes are. And I also know that I'm an engineer, so I recognize that. Well, do I really have to do that? Yeah, you really have to do it. It does make it much more efficient. So. One other thing I forgot to mention when we're talking about questions, those of you that have worked with me in the past know that if you don't ask me a question, I'm going to ask you a question. So just keep that in mind. Keep the questions coming.
All right. Speaking of questions, can we offer some prize for the first question asked?
Just a question, Jack. When should I get started?
Yeah, Don, I'll let you field that one.
Sure, because I muted there. So I get asked this question a ton, Sandra. That's a great question, and it's really important when you start to look at the number of the range of different company sizes we have here. And there's an argument that says, well, there's only 5 of us in the company, so do I really need to start documenting my processes? Because we all communicate, we all know what we're all doing, and so it doesn't make sense to waste any time on that. I will share with you, though, that the sooner you start, the better off you are. Why would you wait till some point down the road to to document something and only be able to take advantage of it after that point. When you can start to do that now, that's number one. Number two is that if you wait till, like you're one of the companies on the call here that's 50 to 100 employees, there's already a whole bunch of different ways of doing things established within your business. And so you have a multitude of different parallel processes, if you will. And so you're better off to get a hold of that sooner, because it's a lot harder to change those behaviors than it is to get them set up at the beginning. So yeah, right from the get-go, like if you have 5 people, and a good read is that E-Myth Revisited. Just they talk very much about that. Just understand what are the different areas, and start to identify the ones that you want to tackle.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for that, Don. Okay. So now, another sort of general orientation is, how are you considering your business processes kind of framework? What is it you're going after when you say, okay, we really want to focus on our practices, improving our practices. Obviously, for this audience, the CSIA best practices is a great fit. I mean, it's essentially what it was intended to be, was learning from your brethren. Here's what has been offered up and suggested as best practices for system integration organizations. If you go to the Exotek website, into our resources, you'll see what we call our basic model, which is business acumen for system integration companies. It's similar. There's lots of different frameworks that you could consider. When we talk about our basic framework, we say the successful system integration company begins at the top with solid general management, providing kind of the strategic planning and organizational structure. So there's things to go to work on there. Underneath that, you have your people management. You have to translate that vision into, actions and goals and objectives for the people in your organization. In the heart of what we call the diamond is kind of, you could think of it, I think of it as kind of the execution from marketing and sales, meaning how you're going to identify clients for which you can serve. Then the project and technical management to deliver what those clients want, and then on the back end, the service and support required to keep that solution up and running to the client satisfaction. That's all underpinned with the financial management required, which becomes, as you become a larger organization, becomes a bigger and bigger portion of being able to deliver your service and solution, is just the finances it takes to run your organization. And then at the very bottom, but not the least, is a little bit kind of the framework that we're talking about here, is what is your process management for the various activities in your organization, and making sure you have that honed as well. The reason I kind of go into that is, if you go to the resources section of our website, we've attempted to organize information around this kind of diamond. So if you're looking for content information, that's a resource in addition to CSI you can go to. I'll take the opportunity to mention here as well, we've got our blog up and going, so we'll publish content essentially weekly and report it there on our blog. So if that's something you want to sign up to kind of stimulate or provoke your thinking in certain areas, then that's what that's designed to do.
Jack, Bruce has got a great question. He says, as we progress through the best practices spreadsheet, how do we know CSI will agree with our documentation and or evidence offered? And for those of you that have started on, say, implementing the best practices from the best practices and benchmarks document, or are looking at trying to progress all the way through to certification and the audit, you'll realize that the way that the best practices is set up is it's a recommendation of things that you should consider and you should do, but it doesn't tell you how to do that, right? So a little bit, Bruce, in answer to your question, well, it depends. What's going to be most effective for you? And if you can, so as an auditor, and I've audited hundreds of companies around the world, what I look for is, what did you say you were going to do, preferably in writing, and can you show me that you've actually done that? So let's say, for instance, we do regular project audits to confirm that the projects are performing according to their project management plan. I'm going to look to see, well, is there a project management plan? And is there some evidence that you've actually gone and checked to make sure that those existed? So I mean, that's a great question. There's no right answer, wrong answer. I've seen everything from, just simple little one pagers to, uh, documents that are all glossy and everything like that get distributed. In terms of the evidence, it's really, what did you say you were going to do, and did you actually do that? So hopefully that answered your question, Bruce.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Don. Is it's really about what works for your organization, and our job as auditors is to ferret that out and make sure that you're doing what you say that you're doing,
Yeah.
regardless of how it's been documented. So.
Yeah, excuse me. Another good question from Paul. Let's talk about CSIA best practices and ISO 9001. How well do they kind of stitch together? I tend to do a lot more of the auditing globally. So a lot more of the people that I deal with are also certified against 9000, and they fit together very, very well. 9000 has actually shifted and morphed a little bit closer to the types of things that best practices talks about. So that even makes it even better. What I have seen that is less effective is when you have an ISO 9000 quality management system and you have a CSIA best practices system. It's way, way better when those become a single system. You probably want to have a fairly flexible numbering scheme. The way things get numbered in terms of ISO 9000 is different than the way they get numbered in the best practices. Where things sit in the best practices, if you've been at this for a while, you will notice that things have moved from, say, section 1 to chapter 10, or shifted around a fair bit. So keep that in mind as you stitch these two things together. ISO is pretty particular about the consistency, and so have some flexibility, some cross-referencing that allows you to tie the two of them together.
We do have a follow-up question that Bruce submitted. And it says, as a follow-up, is it conceivable that certain BPs in the spreadsheet will not be acceptable to our business? And how do we indicate so?
Gee, another really good question, Bruce. There's very, very little in the best practices that gets audited that's not applicable to all CSIA members. It used to be in version 1 and 2, and maybe even into 3, that there was a little bit more of that. But pretty much everything that gets asked in the audit. Now, there's a lot of other best practices, and I think that's important to note at this point too. Only about a third of the best practices in the document are actually audited. Pretty much everything that's audited is going to apply. Now, let's say that there is something that you can point to and says, you know what, this is just absolutely not part of our company. Then in that scenario, the auditor is going to take a look at it and say, did you address it? Did you look at it? Have you considered whether or not this is actually going to have an impact on your business? And as long as you can validate that you've made that assessment, then you're going to get something beyond a 0. If those of you that are getting ready for an audit would know that there's a score between 0 and 5, and 0 says, when I ask the question, you kind of have this blank look and you've never heard of it before. And 5 says, we do way more than that. We have it implemented throughout our company, and there's continuous improvement. So there's a pretty big spectrum. A 3 would be a score that says, yeah, we've implemented it. It's fairly good. It's pretty much all there. So if you can point to something that is absolutely not applicable to your company, and that'll be interesting to see, then it would probably score in around a 1 or a 2. That is not likely going to cause you to not be successful on the audit.
Yeah. And I just, offer out that, ultimately this is as much about improving your business. It's really more about improving your business as it is about an individual score with respect to the audit. So at the end of the day, do what makes sense for your business. And if it's not important to your business, then that's fine. You ultimately have to make that decision. So.
Absolutely, Jack. I'm glad you brought that up, because nothing is more frustrating when I see an integrator struggling with a clause that really doesn't fit their business model in one shape or another, and they're just trying to get that mark on it. Don't do that. Focus your attention on the areas where you're going to get the biggest value add by implementing those best practices. Let the other ones fall. Don't worry about, it's not like your report card where, I got to be. That's okay. In some cases, that's okay. They don't all have to be A or A+.
Right. Or I certainly sitting down, I'm sure you have as well, is something is implemented as kind of, okay, we needed to do this for the audit. So we wrote it down, we have our 1-pager, and it collects dust for 3 years until they get re-audited again, because it doesn't really match their business, doesn't really serve their business. And that's, in my opinion, just a waste of time. So, all right, so let's move on. The next thing we wanted to kind of address is, and I'll say I see this a lot, is just this sense of being overwhelmed. We use this analogy of, it's how do you eat an elephant? One piece at a time, one bite at a time. So, that best practices book is fantastic. It's got the collective wisdom from years and years of system integrators. So everything in there is something that can and should be considered, but they're not all must-dos. That's why I advanced the slide. It's a little bit moves on to what we're talking about here. One of the things I would recommend, if you just have the best practices book and don't have the audit report, is get a hold of an audit report. You can contact us. We can send that to you. It's not like secret, but as Don said, there's about a third of the best practices that are actually audited. And it's a good way of prioritizing things that you should look at in the best practices manual, because the CSIA Best Practices Committee and their collective wisdom has deemed those as I'll say more important business practices that are essential to your success. So it's a way of not getting overwhelmed, is to focus on the third, not because you want to get a good audit score, but because those have been kind of elevated in the CSIA committee's eyes as being the most important to your success.
Jack, Jason jumped in with a pretty good point. And Jason, I think you're due for an audit coming up here this year, so it's quite timely. And his comment was that when we did the audit 2.5 years ago, they lost some points because they didn't differentiate between service and projects, and so they decided that, okay, well, let's do a better job at differentiating between them. And to his point, you know what, that really helped. There's a bias in the best practices. The newer versions, version 5 is much better, but there's a bias in the best practices towards project-centric work. There was an ARC research that was done a number of years ago, and it found that 57% of the money spent on a automated system was spent post-project. So there's a ton of service and support work out there that a lot of integrators tend to start up by being project centric, and really the clients are really looking for somebody to support them. Keep in mind that the technology is getting complex enough that the end user doesn't even have the skill sets to be able to support the stuff. So it's a really, I think, probably one of the faster growing areas that I've seen with some of our clients is the whole service and support side of things. And then, Jack, just to build a little bit on the 1/3 of the best practices that are audited versus the rest of the book. There's a lot of sections of the book I highly recommend. Like for instance, let's say section chapter 2.4, where it talks about training. Go back to the top of that chapter to actually 2.4 and read that part of it, because there's some really good nuggets of information. Or the same thing with configuration management. There's a bunch of places where it's very valuable to read the whole book. The other thing, another point is the best practices really just for the smaller companies that are on the call, or does it apply for large companies as well, right? Is there some place where this just doesn't make sense? I can share with you, I audited some very, very large companies. As a matter of fact, one company I audited, when I asked them what their total revenue was, they said it's 2.3% of the GDP of the country. We did that audit, and there were a number of takeaways that they had to improve on their business. So there's just a lot of value in that. Even if all you focused on was that 1/3, there's still the whole 2/3 rest of the book that is of value to you.
Yeah. Awesome. So anyways, a little bit more on determining which practices and at what level you really want to invest time in. I think Don and I have made the argument already of, what focus on what's going to be the greatest impact to your business. That seems obvious, but yeah, it's not a linear go through and try to implement everything. It's step back from the precipice and look at, where do you feel like you can have the greatest impact. Other thoughts in this area, I'm a big advocate of kind of low hanging fruit. You don't want to overwhelm your organization. So by picking some things that are easy to document, maybe they're highly repetitive, can kind of get you on the path, get you going, demonstrate some early success before taking on larger areas of implementing best practices. So, I'm an advocate of, in addition to greatest impact, just, particularly in the beginning, what's doable, and focus your efforts there.
Yeah, I'm looking again at the poll that we put out there at the beginning, and there's a number of companies in just starting to 25 people area. And if I was in that group, I would say probably the place I'd want to start is on my projects. You're probably going to want to have some formalization to your project methodology. And in actual fact, you'll probably have to have multiple project methodologies. It used to be just a waterfall. Nowadays, we're seeing more and more of the agile methodology being incorporated. And then there's a pretty good group on the call here in the 50 to 100 people. I'm going to guess if you're just starting out now in that area, and obviously the project side of it, financial management side of it are a couple important things, but you are going to very quickly be up against, if you're not already there, two things. One is your sales processes, and the second one is leadership development. Those, for companies in that size, that's probably, if you're not experiencing that problem, you will be experiencing that problem. Your company is, very soon your company is going to outgrow the growth of your employees in the leadership side.
Yeah, excellent point, Don. On the first point about the project methodologies, and we do see that as more flexible, choosing the right project methodology depending on the project. We see that more in our client base than ever. What I add to that is, also have the discipline to know and be able to show why you're picking a particular methodology. As kind of an auditor's hint or whatnot, auditors don't like it when you say it depends. So if you're going to answer it, well, it depends which project methodology we're going to use, then the auditor will also want to know, well, how do you decide then if it depends? So think about the discipline that your organization is using to choose the right project methodology.
Yeah, and not only it depends, and here's how I made that decision, but how do I communicate that to my entire team, right? So in my project management plan, I might want to very clearly state, oh, this one is going to be an agile project, or this one is going to be, it's a prototype. So we're just going to do, proof of concept type of approach. Or now this is a pretty formal, large scale project that's going to go through a waterfall methodology. So um, how do I make that decision, and how do I communicate that to the project team that this is the process that we're going to be using?
Yeah. All right. Any other questions before we move on?
Quiet bunch right now.
All right. Let's move on then. Okay. So our next piece of advice is with respect to kind of your general approach to implementing best practices. Our advice is don't overcomplicate it. Certainly see people get stymied by kind of wanting to boil the ocean, so to speak. Our recommendation is, just do it, meaning don't get fancy. Don't try to invent your best practices. Start by documenting your as-is processes and make sure that those are known in your organization and being followed consistently in your organization. Document what you do, not what you kind of want to do. Don, I know this next one is near and dear to you. Don't try to kind of buy your way into your practices by adopting somebody else's best practices.
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, some of you have already heard me tell the story about an integrator that had a fantastic set of best practices and would actually sell that to his competitors. And I asked him, well, what are you thinking about? Why would you, that's the secret sauce of what makes you successful. And his answer was, yes, but when I sell that to my competitors, they get so distracted for the next 3 years trying to make this fit their company that it takes them out of the market. So I mean, we're certainly in the business of helping people through this process of getting their best practices in place, but it really, your next bullet point, enroll your people in the effort. If it's not built by the people that are going to use it, it will not get accepted by the people that are going to use it. And so you're going to end up spending more effort trying to get them to comply than it's actually worth.
Yeah, I like that languaging, Don. They get them to comply. It just drives home, that's challenging. When you approach it as get your people to document your practices, then it totally shifts the orientation to something they're going to take pride in. This is the way we do it. And there's that sense of ownership. There's the sense of not only wanting to kind of communicate and be able to say this is our way of doing things, but then there's that pride that comes behind it as it's documented, which is they want to own it, they want to continuously improve it. It has a completely different nature and feel to have your people invested in your best practices as opposed to kind of foisting it upon them.
Yeah, and if your first bullet, document what you do, know what you want to do. If your objective here is to get through the best practices, implement the best practices, and then get certified. As an auditor, if I come in and you have aspirational practices, aspirational procedures, in other words, this is what I'd really like to be doing, but I don't really do it, your score is going to be lower than the guy that wrote down on a simple little piece of paper, here's my procedure, and everybody follows it.
And then the other piece of advice we offer out here is, and it seems cliche, but it's very true, is it's about the journey. If we get it, we certainly have people that have come and gotten certified that are doing it to get the check mark, but quite frankly, those aren't the folks that really get the value out of it, and ones, quite frankly, that we want to invest our time and energy in. The process is certainly as important as the end result. There's different ways, as we've talked about, for people to get there, but the process is never done. So the organization, it's one of the reasons you have recertification. The organization that you'll have 3 years from now is different from the organization that you have today. And the practices and processes that you will need to have honed will be different 3 years from now than they are today. So, it's just a reality, and something that once you orient yourself to, it's about the journey, then that is a more successful attitude with respect to best practices.
Yeah, we'll hit on this again, I think, a little bit about the concept of setting it up like a project, have a project manager, and being able to do your work breakdown structure, and all of that stuff is very valid. However, think of it more like a hobby than a project. This is something that you're going to continue to do for a long period of time, as long as the company's around. We do presentations on the hurdles that companies go through. Even if nothing else changes, as your company's growing, things will be significantly different. You're going to go through certain hurdles, and you're going to want to adjust your processes accordingly. We talked about project methodologies. Waterfall was great 10 years ago.
All right, let's move on. This is something that we actually hit in our last webinar, so I don't want to belabor the point, but it is kind of one of the fundamental things as you start and work your way through best practices is actually to establish a set of processes for your processes. Try to explain that a little bit is, first of all, decide up front how you want to document those practices. Believe us, it'll save you time and a lot of headaches to agree on how your documentation format. It's a little bit like project methodologies. It's probably not just a single one, but it could be a Word template, Excel spreadsheet, or a visual tool like Visio, likely some combination thereof. But the more you can kind of identify and standardize the templates that you're using to document your practices, you'll eliminate a lot of rework down the road. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, yeah. There was an integrator we worked with quite a while ago, and they fit in with probably the 11 to 25 people group of similar to this audience here, and the principals of the company had actually left very large companies, and one of the reasons that they'd left companies was, the bureaucracy and the red tape and all of that sort of stuff. So they formed their company with the concept that, we don't want to have documented policies and procedures and stuff like that. All that red tape just gets in the way. In essence, they created an engineer's playground, and their engineer's playground was really successful for up until about 10 people. But then as they started to grow, they started to run into troubles. We got actually called in the second visit into the company when a client, a very large governmental client, let me put it that way, had some concerns over the delivery that they were getting. We went in, we talked to them again, and reiterated the importance of having documented processes. This time it carried a lot more weight, and they took it seriously. They documented their processes and did a phenomenal job. They had written processes. They had a flow chart for their entire business that was part of their intranet, their homepage. They could just click on it, and if they were, I need to write a functional spec. Okay, here, click on this, and it was templates. Gorgeous. It was done extremely well. And it turned the company around. They really started to improve. It turned the company around so much that they were ultimately bought by a significantly larger company. And the guy that was the vice president that championed all of this process ended up doing the same sort of thing for the large company. So, I mean, it was very effective. The guy just couldn't believe the changes in his company and the importance of getting it done.
Yeah. All right. So as far as the processes for your processes, beyond just how you're going to document them, then, equal in our mind in importance is then the continuous improvement effort is determine that at a minimum, kind of define as you're defining each practices, how often you want to review those and get those, get that in some system that you have to alert you that, hey, yeah, it's time to go back and review these best practice, this particular practice area, and make sure that it's still accurate, if it needs to evolve, but based on the growth of your company, and that it's actually being followed. So have that in your plans and your best practices efforts. And then last but not least is this corrective action plan. What do you do when somebody realizes that the practice isn't being followed? How is that documented? Where can that be reported so that can be reviewed and addressed and corrected? So just as important as the documenting, it'll help with that. Oh, it just lives as a piece of paper that gets filed away. These other two areas that we have emphasized here is the continuous improvement and corrective action will actually kind of continue to breathe life into your best practices and make sure that they're really serving the organization.
Yeah, I'm going to build a little bit on that because I've got my hand slapped. We did a number of different seminars and trainings and stuff like that, and we've always had this slide up there. And a couple of years after I did one, a guy come up to me and said, "Don, I've got a complaint about our training." And I said, "Oh, well, gee, that's unfortunate. What was that? I need to figure out how to improve on it." He says, "Yeah, you told us about this, a process for writing process, and then how to improve, and then corrective, but you didn't stress it anywhere near enough. We wrote all our processes up, and then we realized, yeah, we didn't have the right way of doing it, so we had to redo it. And then we realized, oh yeah, we need to have a process for writing our processes." And so the other thing to keep in mind is, as much as this sounds like a lot of overhead, we're talking about take half an hour, sit down, write up a process for writing a process. It's not complex. It could be that, Fred is going to be the guy that's going to write all of our processes, or we're going to assign process owners and they're going to write them up in this format with, with this metadata associated with it, if you will. And then how often are we going to improve it? How often do we want to look at these processes? Or if something goes wrong, how do we track that so that we can do some root cause analysis and things of that nature? These are not complex processes. As a matter of fact, Jack, we just worked on our corrective action routine here a little while ago, and we probably, maybe spent 15 minutes on that.
Yeah. But it was worth it, because now, it does occur to you, you're so busy doing your job and your work, like, oh, I know there's a problem there. And then it just gets in your rearview mirror really quickly. But if you have a place, a way identified in your organization to have your people at least note that, oh, something's wrong here, then it's on a list of, somebody's action items list to go back and look at how that can be corrected for the benefit of the whole organization.
Yeah, we would have got that done in about 30 seconds time, but Jack didn't accept my, Jack, there's a problem, fix it. He thought we needed to be a little bit more detailed.
Yeah. All right.
So Paul's got a question. What's a good average of the number of procedures? And let me see if I've got this correct. So it's a tough one to answer, because some people will have a procedure that covers a lot of different, a broad area. Some people will have just very simple, like somebody might have a procedure that defines the entire project methodology, and somebody might have a procedure that says, I'm only going to talk about the kickoff, or somebody might have a complete, a procedure that covers the entire financial aspect of the company, and others might just have procedures for specific areas. Best answer that I can give to you, Paul, is to do a quick scan through the audit report. And even if you can spend 2 or 3 hours on the audit report and identify those ones where you feel they're repetitive enough, or that, yeah, we could probably use some attention here, or we're going to be bringing on a bunch of employees. Let's make sure that we have this procedure well defined so that we can use that as onboarding. And you will, I think, find very quickly what are the procedures that you want to focus your attention on. We do have a program. We've got a couple of them. One of them called Quick Start and one of them called the Pre-Audit. And the Quick Start is one where we will help you identify those within your company. The Pre-Audit will actually take you a little bit further than that. Identify the procedures that you want to tackle, what your first pass at those are, and then recommendations for improvement on those procedures. So I hate to give you an answer, Paul. It depends, but it kind of depends on how you want to structure things.
All right. So the next one we wanted to kind of pivot to is we talk a lot about documenting processes, but part of implementing best practices is more with respect to policies. You know, part of the best practices effort is kind of involves reviewing and setting the policies for your organization, essentially the rules by which you and your organization will abide. And so we wanted to offer some general advice in this area. You know, first is, you know, recognize that some policies don't just modify behavior. They actually limit the liability of your company. So, you know, it's another one of those areas where it might seem like red tape, but it's certainly valuable to an organization to set the expectations and the rules by which your staff is going to behave. And then leading on to that, you know, to the extent that there's legal implications to that, certainly have your counsel review those very important policies. You know, when it comes to HR and like computer use, good to make sure that you are setting policies that are within governmental guidelines. And then I'll let Don jump in here, but you know, the other thing then is not just to set the policies, but make sure that your employees understand them. So whether that's an employee handbook or employee website, something, is to make sure that you have some way of documenting that you've informed your employees and they've are aware of and agreed to abide by those policies. And we recommend having that kind of, whether it's virtual or actual sign up, to do that annually to make sure that you're covering your bases.
Yeah, Jack. So it might be a little bit confusing to folks about, well, what do you mean limits the company's liability? So think of things like during the recruiting process, we have a policy that requires anybody that's going to be doing an interview read the questions that can be asked and those questions that can't be asked. Or before a proposal goes out, we have a policy that states that it needs to be signed by VP sales or has to have at least 4 eyes on it, whatever the policy is, or that a proposal that goes out must have our standard terms and conditions. Those are all policies that are designed specifically to limit any liability that the company might have. Maybe a policy around safe workplace or things of that nature, around protecting the company. Now, that safe workplace is one to keep an eye out for. So if you have a policy that says we provide a safe work environment for all of our employees, and there is no evidence whatsoever that you do a safety training or safety audit or anything like that, then it actually creates more liability because you've made a commitment to your employees, but you're not really following through on it. On the last bullet there, you have all employees reviewed and signed off. So you just, when you're onboarding employees, making sure that they sign off that they read and understood the policies that you're having in your handbook or whatever. The previous slide, we talked a little bit about continuous improvement. Your continuous improvement should be able to address changes in policy. So if I have a policy change, how does that impact employees that have been around for a while? How do I make sure that they still have read and understood that new policy?
Yeah. So kind of a procedural way of doing that, but one I would recommend is as part of the annual performance reviews, make sure that that is an aspect of the performance review, that they there's that checkbox of reviewing the current policies of the organization and acknowledging that they understand them. It's a good way to kind of keep that up to date, that you're ensuring that the employees are always aware of any revisions to your policies.
Just so keep in mind, a policy says what the rules are, what needs to be done. A procedure talks to how you need to do it.
Yeah. All right. So I want to do a time check too. We're at 10:55, Don. So this is our last slide. So it's a good one
So
to
quit
kind of wrap
talking.
up on.
Quit talking so much. Okay.
Yeah. We wanted to, just for your consideration, what we have seen when we're working with folks on best practices, some of the factors for success. Don kind of alluded this to early. You can't underemphasize the importance of involvement and support for your best practices effort, and that starts with management. If there's not real management commitment, we just, we'll see that best practices efforts struggle, to put it mildly. We recommend that you make it a formal internal project, whatever that looks like in your organization, that you assign somebody that's going to be the project manager for your best practices efforts. And then we talked about enrolling your people in it. It's not that that person has to do all the things, but they're responsible for managing it like a project, assigning the tasks, holding meetings to assess progress, and report that to management. Treat it in one sense. Hopefully, we've kind of by you attending here, even recognize the importance of this. So if it's important to your organization, then it's important enough to define it as a formal project within your organization.
Yeah, Jack, on that project management, best approach, start with the audit report at the chapters, right? And just identify, okay, here's the main chapters that I want to tackle, and then just build your work breakdown structure from that. As a matter of fact, I think there's even some tools that are available to help you define what that might look like and who might be responsible for it. It's basically a audit report, but with columns to say who's responsible for the different areas.
Yeah. Yeah.
I did. I'm just chuckling at Deanna's question. I'm a nice guy. Like I'm pretty easy to get along with. She asks, "Who's the toughest auditor, Jack, Don, or Brian?" We all tend to audit a little bit differently, but our approach to the audit is actually more of, you're hiring us for a couple of days of consulting. So we're coming in, looking at your best practices. We're coming in and saying, okay, great, something you might want to consider for the future and stuff like that. So, the tougher they are, probably the better for you. Another question people ask all the time, Deanna, is what's the failure rate? When you get into the audit, the failure rate is actually very, very low. Some cases we will do a pre-audit with companies just to make sure of that. But yeah, the failure rate is low. There are a number of audits where we come away and, you got to work a little bit on this area before we can give you a passing grade, if you will. But that is just takes, maybe a month or so to get through that. So tough. I think we all three of us have a ton of experience, and think of it from the perspective of being able to leverage that experience to help you build your company.
Yeah. My response would have been the toughest auditor in my experience is the client themselves. Often they're their harshest critics. So I'd agree that we tend to be more consultative in our approach, even to the audit itself. I mean, there's the work that needs to be done to do the scoring and whatnot, but our goal is to provide you feedback on areas you're doing well and areas you can improve, because it's more about bettering your company than it is the audit itself. I realize we're up against the poll as far as time is concerned. So on the common challenge areas, we just noted some different areas that we see that our clients struggle in. So what I recommend is if kind of jot down a particular area if you're having difficulty with it, and then just reach out to us, and we'll see how we might be able to get engaged with your organization and help you with that. So with that, Sandra,
yeah,
and
I'm gonna just jump on a little bit of that. So the guys that are 50 to 100, look at the second bullet, risk management. Make sure you got a really good handle on that, and possibly training and development, in particular, focus on that leadership development, as I was mentioning. To 11 to 25, it's project planning, and then ultimately your financial linkage between project planning and performance. I would encourage all of you to look at service and support, because I think that's a great growth opportunity. Cybersecurity is new enough. We're not seeing a lot of people engage in that as much as they probably need to.
all right, Sandra, you want to take us home?
Yes, I will. On behalf of CSIA, I would like to thank Jack and Don for this informative discussion. Great job, guys. And finally, thank you to all those who attended today's event. And I hope that you find this information very, very informational. We'd like to also remind you that a recording will be available for viewing within the next couple of days. Please visit the CSIA website to view this recording or past virtual events that you may have missed. Finally, be sure to bookmark the CSIA event calendar so you don't miss any of the upcoming events that we do have. And if you have any questions about CSIA, please make sure that you reach out to Jose Rivera or Lisa Richter. They're basically the industry experts for CSIA, and they will definitely answer any questions that you may have. This concludes the program for today. Once again, thank you for joining us, and have a good day.